Grab your chicken sandwich and please sit down, because I'm here to welcome you to the official launch of the ABC Alumni. And before I do, my great thanks to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose country this is, and to their elders past and present. I'd like to extend a very big welcome to the large turnout of former staff, guests and supporters, including amongst them the new member for Wentworth, Karen Phelps, the former member for Wentworth and federal opposition leader, John Hewson, the former CPSU Secretary and now Federal Shadow Regional Communications Minister, Stephen Jones. And look, I think we need to stop clapping now because we've got far too many AOs and ACs and OCs and all sorts of Cs in the room. I've decided I'm not going to go there. But we do have the current trade union officials and delegates, our friends, that is Friends of the ABC. We have GetUp, we have the Australia Institute, we have a bunch of eminent academics from a range of institutions around the country, and of course, welcome to our former ABC staff. I'm not sure if the former New South Wales Premier, Senator and Foreign Minister Bob Carr is here yet, but I'm told he's on his way. I haven't seen him. It's the Sydney traffic. We didn't ask Jared Henderson. There's quite a few people we didn't ask. And, you know, he's a wannabe alumni, I figure. The former chair and managing director, Dave Hill. The former deputy chair, Wendy McCarthy, was coming, but she's been held up by pesky shareholders at an AGM somewhere. And there's scores of alumni and supporters. Now, some of you haven't seen each other for many years. Some of you probably still have old scores to settle, but I'm urging you not to have the punch up here. We'll be adjourning to the UTS Loft Bar across the road and you can deal with each other there. But you know, the one thing that I will say about all the alumni and supporters, plenty more across Australia who've sent their apologies, too long to list, and the world, come to think of it, people like New South Wales Minister Prue Goward, for example, or Shadow Deputy Prime Minister Tanya Plibersek, and many, many others. What I will say about us all, no matter what our differences, is that we all strongly believe... Bob. The Honourable former Senator, Professor Bob Carr, welcome. And what I was about to say is that despite whichever side you're on in the punch-up, what I'm here to call is that we all passionately still believe, no matter how many decades ago it was that you cut tape with Russell Warner or whatever you did, the fact is you still passionately believe in the principle of an independent, free and fearless ABC. And that's why we're here. Because the aims of the alumni, put simply, are the continued advocacy for public media, free, fearless, independent and quality media. In 2 short months, we've organised to be a rallying point of support for the ABC at a time of great change, challenges and attacks, and the recent internal chaos. But there are nearly 200 of us already, and I've got no doubt there'll be many more. We've already lodged 3 submissions, one on competitive neutrality, another to rebuild the gutted service to the Pacific and Asia, and particularly one to the Senate inquiry, for which we lobbied to have suitable terms of reference, where we're seeking to get guarantees of an independent and suitably knowledgeable board. And we're also arguing to restore and lock in secure funding. We've already made arrangements with the ABC to provide staff with training, mentoring and editorial advice and assistance, and our alumni joined Friends of the ABC in pamphleting the booths on election day in the seat of Wentworth. We plan much more targeted activity like that in the future, and I hope you can join us. And of course, we intend to hold social gatherings like the one we hope that you're going to come to across the road. where you can witness the punch-ups. That's about all I need to say, except for any further information, please go to our website. It's up on the flyer, but it's www.abcalumni.net. Remember, we're all volunteers. We need help and donations. We had to foot the bill. The ABC has been fantastic in providing the venue, but we provided the sandwiches and the grog, and that's already probably halved our existing financial reserves. We're hoping you don't drink it all because we'll save it up for the next function. Right now, though, I'd like to thank David Anderson, the Acting General Manager of the ABC, for his generosity and support in providing this venue, and ask him to the microphone to open this event.
Wow, thanks, Matt. What a fantastic room full of VIPs and ABC alumni that are gathered here today. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to see such advocacy for the ABC, and what a formidable room this is. As I stand here right now, I'm happy I'm not taking questions at the end. Look, I'd like to extend that warm welcome to everyone here today, and there's some other people here that are with the ABC. I've worked alongside many of you over a period of time, and it's great to have you come together in support of the ABC now and into the future. So I'm here to wish you well and to thank you for your support. We may not always agree. You may not always agree between yourselves, but I know that it's in the right spirit, and I know that it's to have a strong ABC of the future. So the ABC is part of the fabric of our community and arguably the most loved and important and trusted cultural institution that we have in the country. So whether it's through our journalism, where we provide that fact base of information so people as citizens of this country can make the decisions that they need to for the future, whether we're shining lights into dark corners, whether we're holding people to account, giving voices to those that don't have one, whether we're holding the last town square conversations about what matters to people, whether that be in metro or in regional and rural areas, whether we're entertaining our children or telling Australian stories. And through telling Australian stories, we understand ourselves much more, we understand each other, we understand the community in which we live, the challenges that we all have, we celebrate our differences, and ultimately leads towards inclusion. All of these things I know that you know, but whenever I get a microphone, I feel the need to actually say them all. So it's our independence that is most important, and our independence is non-negotiable. So our independence is still intact, it hasn't been breached. But if there was any positive that came out of the last 2 months, the positive is the groundswell of advocacy for the ABC about our independence and how important it is now and into the future, and something that we are absolutely resolute about. The budget also comes into question. As everyone knows, that in May of this year, the Communications Minister announced an indexation freeze that comes with the usual side order of an efficiency review. The budget for me is something that, while we have editorial independence, our financial independence is also important to me. So you would have seen what was released from the Senate inquiry submission that we put in more recently, that was released yesterday. I don't know if that was leaked, it was actually released by the committee, but it came out yesterday anyway in Fairfax. You'll see that it's one of those issues that I'm calling out into the future, and that is to have a sustainable budget that we can rely on into the future so that we can continue to provide our services as described earlier, now and forevermore. Now, I don't need to tell you this, but the national broadcaster, more than ever at the moment, one that brings the country together, educates, informs and supports Australians, celebrates local and national achievements, reports the news without fear or favour, and embodies Australian creativity and diversity. And it's something that we work on well into the future, but of course it does take a strong, well-funded ABC to do so. So many of you here today are household names still. And I know that many of you here are still active. You're either active in politics or you're active in the media, and so it is fantastic that you are here today, and it's fantastic that you will come together as the ABC alumni and ambassadors for the ABC and the value it provides the Australian people into the future. I think that putting what's happened behind us, and partly my role at the moment as Acting Managing Director, has been to provide stability to the organisation, continually reaffirm that what's important is our content, our people and the Australian public and the community service that we provide. And I can assure you, and I think it's worth noting, that the dedication and commitment of the ABC staff is stronger than it's ever been and is unwavering and continues to be strong. And as I travel around the country at the moment, that comes through in spades. The ABC staff at the moment, as when you were part of the ABC, if in fact you were, is stronger than ever. So I want to make one final and important point. So we should be incredibly proud of what the ABC does. I always find that when I'm talking to people, that when I highlight the examples of recent achievements of what the ABC continues to do, that provides as the best vehicle as a demonstration of what the ABC does now and what it continues to need to do into the future. So thank you for coming together today. Thank you for kicking off the event. Thank you for supporting the group that pulled this together, led by Matt, I believe. And I wish you all the best. We're here to work together, and anything I can do to help us, let me know. And just want to thank you again for your ongoing support for the ABC every day. Thank you.
Dave Anderson, and because I started late, we won't hesitate to move right on rapidly because some of our people here have got to leave fairly rapidly. But so without further ado, I want to introduce somebody that really, it's the old cliche, needs no introduction. Well known to anybody who's ever watched the ABC, the former compere at Four Corners and for many years 7:30, and before that Lateline. Guess who I'm talking about? Okay, so Kerry O'Brien.
Thank you, Matt. I think you're a bit taller than me. Early in the life of the National 7:30 report, which began in December of '95, we had a new arrival from commercial television, a woman named Mari Moore. She'd worked for every commercial network over a period of about 19 years, and she was our new supervising producer. And Mari came to me about 3 days into the job and she said, "Okay, how do you do it?" And I said, "How do we do what?" She said, "Is it in the air conditioning or is it in the water?" And I said, "Come on, Mari, what are you talking about?" She said, "Well, I just want to know how you infect us. How is it that for 19 years in commercial television, nobody ever accused me of political bias of any kind? But 3 days into this job, and I am fielding abusive calls from people accusing me of being a biased Labor bitch." And I said, "Welcome to the club." Sir Alan Hume was Postmaster General in the Menzies years and beyond. And in my first year at TD, at This Day Tonight in Brisbane, which was the trailblazing daily current affairs program, during that year, 1972, one of the reporters approached both Sir Alan Hume and a trade union official from whatever the posties union was called in those days, to do with a story that was in the news of conflict between the union, the workers, and the government, or in the PMG. And the union official agreed to do the interview. Sir Alan Hume declined. And such was the nature of the ABC's approach to journalism in those days. This was a kind of new beast. Sir Alan Hume made the assumption that if he declined, that would be the end of the matter. And TDT dared to say, well, that's a form of censorship. So we're going to still accord the union official the right to give his side of the story, and we'll just have to point out to our audience that Sir Alan Hume declined the opportunity to give the other side. Now, senior management were rather fussed about this, and they actually instructed TDT not to run that interview. Now, this is one rare moment when, in the history of the ABC, as I recall it, where that program, the executive producer of that program, took the decision that this amounted to self-censorship, and that the program wasn't going to be a part of it, and he ordained that interview go to air. He was subsequently suspended, and for his sins, he was punished by being sent to Four Corners, which I thought as penalties go, I would have been happy with that one myself. But the point about it is that was a period when there were just assumptions that if the government assumed it was going to be like this, then more often than not, it was like that. And self-censorship, as we all know, is the most dangerous form of censorship of all. But that was one example where there was a pressure from the government, whether Hume himself had demanded of the ABC that interview not be run, was almost beside the point. He let his displeasure known, and senior management essentially backed him. I think it was probably around the same time that Stuart Littlemore ran a story which showed police being rather proactive in taking on protesters in the Vietnam moratorium, and they were essentially getting into the crowd, and they'd taken their numbers off. Now, as a result of that footage, Sir Robert Askin declared his own moratorium on TDT and wouldn't come on. In South Australia, in that period, Clive Hale was the anchor of the state-based program there, and Steele Hall, the Liberal, and he was a Liberal, Steele Hall, as the Liberal Premier, took great offence at the fact that Clive, when making a comment in an introduction, raised an eyebrow. And Steele Hall read deep political intent into that eyebrow, and he also declared a ban on TDT. 1977, George Negus had become the ABC's leading political interviewer for TDT. He did, I think, at least 2, possibly 3 interviews with Malcolm Fraser during the 77 campaign, and they were pretty strong interviews, as you would expect. They were robust interviews. There were some stories that Malcolm Fraser was displeased, and there was a bit of fuss about it. George felt the heat inside the place, and at the end of that year his contract wasn't renewed, and it was made plain to him why. Malcolm Fraser told him sometime later, was at pains to tell him sometime later, that he had not complained, and he most certainly had not sought George's resignation, sought George's sacking. So you put all of those elements together and you've got to conclude that was a form of self-censorship. Then we come to I remember in the Hawke years, and David Hill's, and David's in the audience, David Hill's 8 cents a day campaign when Peter Walsh was the finance minister in the Hawke government, and if there was anything that moved, he wanted to cut it, including the ABC, and David's response was an 8 cents a day campaign where he appealed to the Australian public, knowing full well how strong and how passionate the support was, to support the ABC and put pressure on the government. Now, the Hawke government didn't like that one little bit, but there was a case of an independent managing director of the ABC standing up and being seen to be independent, backed by a board that was independent and seen to be independent. Then we came to the Howard years. We saw Donald Macdonald appointed as the chairman of the ABC. Now, I think it's one of the bad traits of human nature to forget history, and we're no better at it than anybody else. We do forget our history. And I noticed when the heat went on the ABC again recently that people were praising Donald Macdonald's chairmanship and that he had stood up for the ABC. Well, towards the middle and end of his time there, you could say that as a fact, but it certainly wasn't obvious at the start. He was John Howard's close personal friend. He came to the job with extremely pursed lips when I had him on the program immediately after budget cuts had been announced. The cuts had been announced several days before he came to the job. He'd been advised by the Minister, Richard Alston, beforehand, even though he hadn't set foot in the place yet, but the Managing Director hadn't been advised. And on every question I asked him, on all of the points that were going on at that time, there were at least 3 points on which he made plain that he was at odds with both his new Managing Director, well, he was new, but his Managing Director, Brian Johns, and he was also out of step with his Deputy Chair, Di Gribble. And I'm throwing all the questions at him, expecting an ABC chairman who might at least go through the motions of being supportive of the institution, and it was like pulling teeth. He was also the chair of the board that gave us Jonathan Shire, and he did his own backpedalling later on about that. But that is the fact of that board. Another very active member of that board was Michael Kroger, close personal friend of the Treasurer Peter Costello. There were others on the board like Janet Albrechtsen, who was at least as well known with her columns, through her columns, for her hostility to what she described as a sort of, I'm paraphrasing with my words, but a kind of poisoned ABC culture. You know, we were these kind of spiritualist socialists who somehow managed to inculcate this poison into the likes of Mari Moore and others as they walked through the door. She was on the board. Keith Windshuttle. I don't know that Keith ever displayed great passion on behalf of the ABC before he came on the board, and I don't remember him displaying much of it when he was on the board. Now, I don't think by any objective measure that you could say that board demonstrated its clear and unequivocal independence from government, and we all knew in the Shire era that he was intent on changing the culture. So I don't think there should ever be a point when inside the ABC we just assume that whatever we're doing is right and good and proper, and that we never need review, that we never need scrutiny. Of course public broadcasting does, and of course mistakes get made, and of course we have our low times as well as our high points. But nonetheless, the central thread, I think, that has run through the ABC through all of this period is the spirit of the staff. And the spirit of the staff is the pursuit of excellence. And I don't think that pursuit has ever been lost. You know, even in the relatively staid days as we see them now, that probably didn't feel staid then. I think that the ABC has always had this fundamental goal, which was the pursuit of excellence in providing both information, intelligently reported, intelligently and meaningfully and knowledgeably analysed, and not in a biased way. And in the Shire years, when I knew that I had a target on my back, and others in the place also had targets on their back, and we were in the eye of the storm because we were the daily current affairs program that was doing most of the political interviews at the ABC. And we would have conversations from time to time just to remind ourselves of why we were there and how we should respond to the regular attacks and to the heat and the hostility that we felt, sometimes from within. And the answer and the solution that we had arrived at from the outset and that we stayed with all the way through was walk a straight line, report fearlessly and fairly, and do not take your eye off the game and let your work speak for itself. And at the end of the Shire era, Shire was gone and we were still standing. Now, the situation today is as bad, if not worse, than at any time that I can recall since I have been a part of or even an observer watching the ABC. I think the hostility is just bizarre. You know, I can remember Bronwyn Bishop coming up to me late one budget night in Canberra. She was with a group of supporters. I was standing with a couple of colleagues and we'd just finished our budget stuff. And she drew me aside and she held out her hand and she said, "Kerry, I've always admired survivors." And she said, "You are a great survivor." Shook my hand and she said, "You have no idea the extent to which you were hated on our side." She said, "You were public enemy number one." And she didn't say any more than that, and she wouldn't be pushed, and I knew she wouldn't be pushed, and I didn't expect her to go any further than that. I wasn't surprised by the broad proposition, but I was surprised to think of the mere possibility that a single journalist could be public enemy number one of a government. I mean, how absurd is that? What a waste of energy that would be if it was true. But here we are in this current climate. We've seen at least 3 budget cuts, whether it's cuts or stuff being, or programs being removed. We've seen 3 inquiries, 2 of them efficiency inquiries, a 4th if you count the Senate. And I said this at the ABC rally, I can't for the life of me understand. If a government appoints its own efficiency inquiry, it appoints the people that are going to run that inquiry, it accepts the results of that inquiry, it appears to be satisfied with that inquiry, and uses that inquiry to justify cuts, and yet 2 years later it announces another one. So what was that? Was it that the ABC suddenly lapsed deeply into inefficiency in the 2 years between them? Or was it the first inquiry was inefficient? Or was it simply another means to an end, which was to further justify another cut and to keep us under pressure? I mean, these things are open to speculation, but when they happen, you do have to ask the questions. And then on top of that, the allegations that were made about pressure from the then Prime Minister to the then Chair of the ABC about hostility and anger towards 2 ABC staff members, and the allegations that the Chair then demanded their dismissal. So we're now in a situation where the Managing Director has been sacked, where the Chair of the board that sacked the Managing Director is also gone, and we have a board that I have to say itself still has question marks over its head. And the ABC, which has been taken through a massive upheaval, and the effects of that upheaval are still being felt today in terms of the digital revolution that we're all grappling with to one degree or another, a revolution which is utterly critical to the present, let alone the future, of the ABC. And so despite the fact that a lot of very positive comments are being made about David Anderson, nonetheless, while ever you have an acting person in the job, you have an ABC that is not going to function at its fullest. There will be seeds of doubt amongst the people walking around the place. People will be second-guessing not just what is expected of them now, but what a new managing director might expect when he or she is appointed in the hopefully not too distant future. And then there has to be a new chair appointed. And by God, Scott Morrison on Insiders was saying that he would be watching the ABC. Well, the message to Scott Morrison is that everybody in the country who supports the ABC across the political spectrum, and there are many, many of them, they make up the majority of people in this country, should be watching Scott Morrison as the government goes through the process of appointing a new chair. I'm in the process of travelling around the country promoting a memoir, and wherever I have gone, and I've now covered most capital cities and a number of strong regional centres as well, and wherever I have gone, despite their obvious fascination with the contents of my book, the dominant questions are about the ABC. And I urge on the alumni, and I know that Matt and his fellow organisers have got this very much front of mind, and I think it's true for friends of the ABC too, that in any presentation to the public or in private, seeking support and fighting the good fight to defend the ABC, that they never lose sight of the fact that our supporters do span the spectrum of Australian politics, and that many, many of our supporters would vote Conservative and have probably voted Conservative all their lives. Now, how is it that so many of these intelligent people, intelligent, well-educated people, watch the ABC and listen to the ABC month after month and year after year, and somehow miss the bias? Because they are amongst those who year after year, in independent polls that are taken every year, vote the ABC as the most trusted institution in the nation. For years and years, the most trusted institution in the nation. And we haven't just we haven't just dealt with hostility from government, we've dealt with a block of hostility from News Corp. And that hostility has gone back over quite some time, but it has never been as vociferous as it is today. And I think everybody understands what may lie behind that, and that is that in this age of convergence, the ABC, News Corp and other newspaper groups are meeting in the middle. That is the new age. And the idea that the ABC should somehow be excluded from that is just absurd. It defies logic, it defies credulity. The ABC would go under if it was in any way restricted from sharing that space equally with every other media organisation. It is utterly vital, and I'm sure we all understand that in this room. I'll just finish by saying one thing and supporting Dave in this, and that is, at the heart of everything is genuine independence. Yes to scrutiny, yes to protecting integrity. You know, integrity takes a long time to build and it doesn't take much to lose. And every ABC employee, I'm sure, has that front of mind. But the key to it all is the independence of the board. It's the independence of the ABC, and if you're going to have an independent ABC, a truly independent ABC, where staff aren't looking over their shoulder, sometimes in fear, then you have to have a genuinely independent board, a board that is appointed at arm's length from government. Now, not the appearance of it, not the bullshit version of it, the real one, real arm's length independence. And a government that can't guarantee that is a government that should is a government that should be judged by all ABC around the country as found wanting. Thank you very much.
Kerry O'Brien, well, I can't say much more than that. As some of you may know, I had the good luck to leave the ABC board earlier this year with impeccable timing. But when I was there, I had the good fortune to get to know our next speaker, who once again is one of those people who doesn't need much introduction, and I haven't got time to list all her qualifications, frankly. She's a very eminent medical pioneer and professor and great friend of the Indigenous population in this country and former director of the ABC, and I think the recent People's Choice for chair of the ABC, according to a poll run by Friends of the ABC. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fiona Stanley.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional owners' country and that we acknowledge that. I always like to acknowledge it by reflecting what we did to them, and that's the reason why we need to acknowledge it. I just want to say to Kerry that being public enemy number one of this particular group should be put on your CV. You're doing a great job, and I think that reflects them more than you. And that's the same for every single person in the ABC who feels that they are being criticised for bias and for not doing the right thing. If you're being criticised by certain people, it's obviously you're doing the best job and you should continue to do so. So I'm really, really honoured that you've asked me to speak, Matt, and of course, being not very biased, I'm really not honoured at all, because one has to be balanced. I started off as an Argonaut in Sydney as a young child, and from Argonaut to board member. Can you imagine anything more wonderful? I considered it to be a huge privilege to be on the ABC board. I had to jump through several hoops to independently be selected for that. I had to write a 3-page resume and what I would bring to the board, and I hope that I was selected on merit and that I wasn't a political appointment. In fact, I hadn't met Stephen Conroy until I actually went to the board, and so it hadn't been somebody that I'd even known. And I believe that a board member should have content. I know that it really is important that a board has to be independent, and Kerry's made that point, but really what the board members are there for, the directors are there for, are to provide some content that's going to help the ABC in its activities. But really, aren't we there as advocates for the ABC? Where's the advocacy of this current board for anything other than I don't know what? So I don't think it should be a management in any way. The experts are all of you guys. We should have, as a board, should be advocating for you, enabling, fighting things like when Janet Albertson was put on the selection panel for the board, that was just absolutely unacceptable. And I wasn't allowed to make any comment about that because I was told it was fait accompli. Now, that's not right. We should have said it's not acceptable to have someone who loathes the ABC to actually be on the selection panel for the next board members. While I was in the ABC, on the board, I did a review of science. Lovely to see Robin here. And I benchmarked the ABC against the BBC, the CBC, and for the words of people in the UK who are probably good friends of Robin Williams, but anyway, people like Robert May, the former chief scientist, was that we actually had the best science broadcasting in the world. Now, that's even more so now. And that was a serious benchmarking against the CBC as well. The breadth and depth of what the ABC did, not just in science, but that's what I discovered when I did this review, was extraordinary. And a lot of people in the ABC didn't know the breadth and depth. For science, from children's right through to the in-depth science programs and everything in between, including the things on the news and on all the other programs. And one of the reasons that I wanted to be on the board of the ABC when I retired from my institute director job, the only board I wanted to be on was the ABC, because I'm passionate about democracy. And I was passionate about getting information out there about things like climate change, which we're launching next Tuesday, No Time for Games, about climate change and children's health. And it is incredibly important that the ABC, there isn't any other media outlet that's as good or is giving this information. It's the ABC that has to do it. It has to provide this information to citizens so they can make decisions about things like climate change, the Uluru Statement from the Heart, whether we should give Aboriginal people a voice, and all these things that are just so important for us, the nation of refugees. But so informing democracy, in accurate information, so much more than just news and current affairs, which of course are very important, but there's just so much more that you do. Look, you're doing in music, both from the teenager music right through to old people like me who love FM, but I couldn't live without Radio National. And it's absolutely terribly important that that continues. But don't forget the oldies, Dave. So I know a lot of young people who listen to Radio National too. But look at the huge benefit that you are doing to trying to improve this country. Look at all the royal commissions and inquiries that are set up after things like Four Corners programs or 7:30, whatever. It's been incredibly important. They might not take notice of those recommendations of royal commissions, bloody hell, but anyway, you're doing your bit to do that. And I think if you look at the war on waste, for example, has revolutionised Australia's, look at school children, what they're doing and all those. I think it's been amazing and very important. So you're an extraordinary group of highly intelligent and passionate people, and I would do anything to help you in this alumni organisation, which I think is a brilliant initiative to help and mentor and support the group of the most outstanding, passionate, crazy people that I've ever met in my life, and I love you dearly. I will do anything to help you. Please, please use people like me in that function. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fiona. And moving right along, I'd like to introduce the former head of TV drama, former head of TV, founding partner of Matchbox Pictures and the producer of a string of award-winning films like, most recently, I guess, the ones to mention, The Slap and Secret City, but Brides of Christ. Once again, too long to mention, an alumni, Penny Chapman.
Lovely to be here. I want to say a very few words about the redemptive power of narrative. In recent years, scientists have taken to examining the effects of narrative, novels and television drama in particular, on our mental health. In 2015, Oklahoma University psychologists Jessica Black and Jennifer Barnes published findings that watching television drama can boost our emotional intelligence by helping us understand the inner lives of others. That reading fiction and watching high-quality TV drama requires us to fill in the gaps in the narrative to enrich our understanding of characters' mental lives, relationships, and emotions. Of course, Aristotle had it pegged already. Whereas history lets us know what happened, he said, poetry, fiction, is more important because it is about what can happen. We in the television industry have been banging on for years about how important it is to tell our Australian stories, to reflect ourselves to ourselves. To be honest, I think that's just the tip of it. The longer I work at this game, the more it seems we need to tell our stories of this place so we can connect with the stranger among us and the stranger within us. So we can keep our community emotionally and psychologically healthy and hearty. This feels to be important now more than ever. And it seems important now more than ever that our public broadcaster be recharged with the work of providing a rich narrative diet to every Australian in every corner of this place. For as an institution of public service, the ABC doesn't need to look to its commercial bottom line or to find ways to make its product addictive. It simply needs to provide nourishing stories that are, in the words of our dearly departed Richard Gill, good for us. In my association with the ABC over the past 3 decades, I've had the good fortune to be closely associated with, loosely associated with, and an ardent admirer of narrative works that have taken us intimately and always engaged into territories that we didn't know or had forgotten. Childhood institutions, women religious, communities grown from migrations to this place, the minds of corruption, the minds of women, the minds of men, the minds of the displaced. Programs like Brides of Christ, The Leaving of Liverpool, Blue Murder, My Place, Mustangs, The Slap, Rake, Sea Change, Barracuda, Glitch, Frontline, 7 Types of Ambiguity, and others. In recent times, though, some of the most extraordinary narrative enlightenment the ABC has given us is what's grown out of its Indigenous unit. A great dramatist always has something to say. And over the last decade or so, it's our Indigenous dramatists who've been coming forward with the stories and worlds that say something and say it well, that take us into the lives and emotions that many of us dared not seek out. Redfern Now, Clever Man, Mystery Road, Black Comedy, and the forthcoming Black Bitch. It's when my friends and I started greeting each other with "What's this then, slut?" that I knew a profound cultural transformation was taking place and that the ABC was nurturing it. Australia is a place of great diversity, and the ABC has a distinctive and vital role to play in how we feel about each other. Thank you.
I should say that amongst some of the apologies were Deborah Mailman and also Rachel Perkins, who's busy doing a string of interviews at the moment. But certainly, as I said to you at the start of the proceedings, there's a lot of us out there, you know, and people who want to tangle with this place are going to have to reckon with us. Some parts of the ABC I've always detested, but there are a lot of parts of the ABC that I really love, and I imagine it's the same for a lot of you. But for the parts that you really love, we're going to have to fight for it. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what this organisation is all about, harnessing all our knowledge and taking it up to them. That's the end of our proceedings. I'd very much like to thank all of the people who came, and particularly our speakers. We've got some gifts that the hard-working Helen has organised. Thank heavens she thinks of these things. And but we've also cleverly ended up a little bit earlier than I think they were going to kick us out. It's 1 o'clock actually. They were going to kick us out at 1. But I reckon with Dave's indulgence, we might be able to finish the sandwiches and have a few more drinks here. Some of you I do know, Bob Carr for example, and others have to rush. If anybody particularly wants to add a few words, then I do have a spare microphone down there. But in the meantime, you can also enjoy polishing off maybe not all the grog, but some of it. And if you want to keep going at your own expense, then we've booked the Loft Bar, which is across the road at the UTS. It's the one that has upstairs and outside and everywhere else. And you can keep going there for as long as you like. And the other thing I would urge you, doesn't matter if you didn't work at the place, you can still join the alumni as a supporter. We're very receptive to donations to improve the quality of the champagne. We hope to have more social events. It's not going to be all hard work. There will be some pleasure. I've found a distinct pleasure in seeing some of you here today. I haven't seen you for ages. And so that's a bit therapeutic for us old folk. But I've got to tell you, there's 1,000 staff left the ABC in the last few years. We've had our budget cut by a third. These are tough times, and alumni are not just old people anymore. There are young people there too. And as Kerry alluded to, there's a technological revolution this place has to gear up to. There's a lot of issues, and without every hand on deck to support it, particularly over the next several months, the place is in trouble. So get to it. Thank you.